Hi, this is Riedoh Berdien, current strength and conditioning coach for the Gambia men's football team as well as South African women's football team. Join me with Team South Africa as we focus on their football specific conditioning methodology leading up to the historic maiden FIFA Women's World Cup qualification in France 2019. Conditioning within national football teams is mainly about maintaining players' conditioning, as most of the conditioning elements are done with their football clubs. In the South African women's national team, we work with different players and different positions ranging from defenders, midfielders and attackers, as we all know the different physical demands of these positions. Training camps last for about 2 to 3 weeks, so normally we draw up a 3-week conditioning model. In the above video, the team was in their first training camp in 2019, training starting at training week 1, cycle 1. We have designed a soccer football periodization training structure where players come in, they activate by doing core and stability exercises which last around about 5 to 7 minutes. We have 2 conditioning elements within these warm-ups. We have an extensive type warm-up lasting around about 15 to 20 minutes, an intensive type warm-up lasting around about 10 minutes. Within these warm-ups we look at conditioning elements as with hip mobility movements, plyometrics, SAQ, speed, agility and quickness as it's known, coordination, dynamic stretches or dynamic movements. Within these extensive and intensive warm-ups, we have warm-ups that are isolated and warm-ups with using the football. Second element, we have a passing or skill conditioning drill. We have an extensive pass or conditioning drill, which is normally a higher duration, lower intensity, having a longer distance, creating fewer actions. These extensive drills is normally used for football endurance. The intensive passing or conditioning drill, we look at a lower duration, a higher intensity, shorter distance, creating more actions. We head down to 3, which is the explosive preparation exercise, known as EPE. Intensive conditioning elements, we look at shorter distance, which is a quicker recovery, and extensive conditioning elements, we look at a longer distance, which has a higher recovery. Within these explosive preparation exercises, we design football specific drills involving 1v1 duels or 2v2 drills, which also includes plyometrics and SAQ movements. And finally we have football conditioning games. 2 intensities there. We have an extensive conditioning possession exercise, numbers ranging from 11 versus 11 to 8 versus 8 in a bigger dimension, and an intensive conditioning possession exercise, numbers ranging from 7v7 to 3v3 in a smaller dimension. From there players head down to the cooling process, which lasts around about 5 to 10 minutes. Extensive type warm-up with the hip or hurdle mobility. Players proceed over the hurdle using high knees, in a slow controlled movement. What we're looking at is a high range of movement. After each movement we obviously include a gentle squat with in between the hurdles, and then we proceed with a one-legged lunge, and then walking back to provide an optimum recovery. We then move on a one-legged lunge to a lunge movement in between the hurdles, again encouraging the high range movement. The second phase of the warm-up, we have shuffling actions where players are doing shuffling left to right and then slowly jogging back. The next action is a forward backward running movement where players start from left to right, so each exercise is being repeated. And then we have a backward shuffle where players are opening the body, shuffling in a backward movement way, and then slowly jogging back to end of the exercise. In this extensive warm-up with hurdle mobility, we're looking at a high full range of movement which the hurdle forces the players to do. We're engaging the brain to coordinate a controlled movement as we use the muscles in a functional way, prepping the body for dynamic movements or stretches in the next phase of the extensive warm-up. We include gentle squats with a good body position or posture combined with hurdle mobility movements. Note that players have lots of recovery between actions or movements, allowing a slow integration into training. We proceed by activating the quads and hamstrings, doing one-legged lunges, both on the right leg and then on the left leg. By doing these functional based exercises, we are training the players' coordination, balance and control. We proceed doing the functional based exercises, side on facing the left and then the right. We still focus on a full range of movement within a one-legged lunge in a controlled manner. This extensive warm-up is normally done after a day off when players might feel a bit sluggish or a bit slow, or after a football conditioning session where muscles might be a bit stiff. Entering the next phase of the extensive warm-up, we increase the heart rate slightly by introducing actions or movements that occurs in a football match. An example is shuffling action, starting at 60 to 70% with a high recovery, walking back to the starting point. We continue with a forward and backward running movement, starting at 60%, working way to 70 with a high recovery back to the starting point. Each action and movement is repeated. Ending off this phase of the extensive warm-up with a backward shuffle movement, keeping it at 60 to 70% with a high recovery back to the starting point. Each action is repeated. The final phase of the extensive warm-up are the dynamic stretches or actions. Dimensions are much bigger or longer. In the above warm-up, each player is doing their dynamic stretch movement at every marker on the field, which is about 6 to 8 meters apart. The above demonstration shows actions or dynamics of kicking the buttocks, touching the inside ankles, high knee raises, adductor movements, closing the legs, then opening with leg extension movements, etc. In the intensive type warm-up with SAQ, we ensure the central nervous system is awake. This sends fast messages to the brain and muscles, developing anticipation, reaction, thought process and response time. Dynamic movements are quicker than the extensive type warm-up. Speed, agility, quickness elements is introduced within this intensive type warm-up, allowing a fast integration into training. In the above intensive type warm-up with SAQ, clearly shows the distance are much shorter, also the dynamic movements are much more as well as quicker, yet we also still encouraging a full range of movements. Note the recovery time is much less between actions. This should prepare the body for high intensity football conditioning sessions. In this intensive type warm-up, we use different shapes and sizes. We have used a circular shape, including the football as well. So we introduce dynamic switches with football actions like passing, moving, creating space, as well as heading the ball, providing a warm-up with the plyometric jumps. It's important to activate players' muscles with dynamic movements before heading into intensive warm-up with plyometrics, the landing and jumping elements. This warm-up type prepares the body for high-intensity actions or movements. It switches on key stabilizers on the knee, which helps develop explosive properties. This warm-up type is used before intensive football conditioning sessions. Below, we're demonstrating an intensive warm-up with football actions. We start by passing the ball and creating space to receive the ball in a circular intense dimension. The football actions is done for about 30 or 40 seconds. Then we combine it with our dynamic movements or stretches, working from the upper body down to the lower body. The final phase of the intensive warm-up with football actions, we divide the group into two halves, placing each player at each action point. This allows the players to go and look for each football action point by accelerating, decelerating, changing direction, and always looking around for the available football action point. These actions include passings, volleying, heading, jumping and chesting the ball, etc. We have designed extensive passing exercise to help football players, conditioning players to improve their skill and technical abilities in a football specific way. This extensive passing exercise type encourages players to pass the ball with speed, drop pass with quality, and also train penetration passes. Note the distance between each player is greater than an intensive passing exercise type. This meaning players have a greater distance to follow, making their football actions fewer with more recovery time between each football action. The above football conditioning drill or circuit focuses on conditioning elements of football specific endurance. Players have to dribble within an extensive distance, working on their passing back to their teammate or small goals, quickly transitioning back to the starting point, replicating a recovery run or a transition run. The above football conditioning drill or circuit focuses on conditioning elements of football specific speed, agility, quickness and coordination. This exercise includes soccer actions or football actions with quick combination passing with quick dribbling actions. This extensive type football specific conditioning drill, creating football actions of passing, creating space, dribbling and opening the body. The isolated conditioning is covering the distance to each marker. Within the above drill, players could cover big distances by doing these above football actions. The second sequence within the football specific conditioning drill, football actions with quick combination passing, creating space, dribbling is created. In the third sequence of the football specific conditioning drill, football actions with quick combination passing, creating space, dribbling and a vertical extensive pass is created. The above is an example of an extensive type explosive preparation exercise known as EPE with football actions. Players create 30 seconds of 1 meter football actions, then should transition 30 meters together to the next football action point, creating more football actions within the 30 seconds. Before recovery, distances can be manipulated from 30, 60, 80 meters, as well as the recovery times can be manipulated. The above is an example of an extensive explosive preparation exercise, isolated, meaning not using the football. Players have to jog 60 meters at 60% with a high recovery time between sets. This EP is used as a base to building up for hard conditioning sessions and preparing for football sprints. Above is an example of an intensive explosive preparation exercise with football actions. Players perform a 1 meter SAQ, speed, agility, quickness action before doing a football action with a quick combination pass, instep volley or heading actions before an intensive transition sprint of 8 meters. Number of players determine the recovery time. In this exercise, it's quite high. Another intensive explosive preparation exercise with football actions in a 4v2 rondo type. Players create football actions within 4v2 grid. Example, passing under pressure, creating space, making quicker decisions, pressing the ball, tackling, and then a 10 meter reaction sprint transition into another 4v2 grid. Once the ball has been won, the other player has to go into the grid trying to win the ball, creating more football actions in the grid. Intensive explosive preparation exercise with isolated reaction sprints. The exercise is designed to improve players' reactions, speed, agility, quickness and acceleration. Player 1 stands 2 meters with their backs to their teammates. During this process, the player behind will perform a 1 meter SAQ action before moving left or right, accelerating and then sprinting 5 or 10 meters to the end, while the standing player has to react and catch their teammate. Once completed, both players perform a slow recovery jog and exchange positions. Intensive explosive preparation exercise with 4 isolated stations. These stations include conditioning elements of 1 meter speed reactions, using quick feet, coordination movements, plyometric jumps, and agility shuffling actions. Integrated into a 10 meter sprint with a 5 meter tapering, with a high recovery, meaning walking back to the station. Each action is or exercise is repeated before moving to the next station. Another intensive explosive preparation exercise, this time with 2 isolated stations. These stations include conditioning elements of 1 meter speed reactions, quick feet, coordination movements, plyometrics, and agility, which is shuffling actions, integrated into a 5 meter sprint with a 3 meter tapering, with high recovery, starting off with walking back to the station. Each action or exercise is repeated. Note the recovery time can be manipulated to make the exercise more intense. The above exercise is an intensive explosive preparation exercise with football sprints. Players are grouped into 2 teams at 4 starting points on either side of the goalposts. 1 player from each team sprints 10 meters, cuts inside, creating 1v1 duels. During these duels, football actions are created like dribbling, scoring, pressing, blocking, tackling, and transition, etc. Once action is completed, players recover and the next players needs to get ready and start the exercise again. Depending on the number of players determines the recovery volume. We continue with the intensive explosive preparation exercise with football sprints. Players are put into 2 groups. Players line up next to each other. The ball is being passed into a 15 meter space. Both players has to react and sprint to the 15 meters smoothly, integrating into a 1v1 duel with football actions of dribbling, scoring, pressing, blocking, and tackling. Note that the recovery is minimal as players has to start at the next starting point, which is close by. The above is a demonstration of an intensive football conditioning position exercise, 4 versus 4 plus 1. We created an intensive conditioning grid, which was a dimension of 40 by 24 meters. This forces the players to make lots of football actions of passing, creating space, pressing, scoring, tackling, and transition runs from attack to defend and from defend to attack, etc. Once the ball is out of play, another ball is thrown in, not allowing players to recover, creating a high intensity training effect. An intensive to medium football conditioning game, which is 5 versus 5 plus 1. We created a medium conditioning grid, which was a dimension of 50 by 30 meters. With this dimension, players are producing lower football actions than the intensive conditioning game, with same actions of passing, creating space, pressing, scoring, tackling, and transition runs from attack to defend and from defending to attack, etc. A medium training effect is then now created. A extensive football conditioning game, 10 versus 10 plus the goalkeepers. The dimension used is 100 by 60 meters. It's a full pitch. With this dimension, players are allowed to recover more. Fewer football actions is created compared to the intensive or medium possession conditioning games. The same actions of passing, creating space, pressing, scoring, tackling, and transition runs from attack to defend and from defend to attack, etc. is created. An extensive training effect is created when the ball is out of play or a goal is being scored. More recovery time is given, for example in training games. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.